Morning, everyone. Got a little bit of snow last night, not too much, and there's some blowing around here and there. Minus 5 degrees right now. Not too bad.
Something that was addressed, he's indirectly in the Rolo report when he talks about the Freedom Convoy movement and how there's been a growing movement of people across Canada who just are very frustrated with our institutions. And so last week, Justin Trudeau, he adjusted his tune a little bit since, but last week, Justin Trudeau on this issue was very much, it's wrong to even talk about this because you're planting seeds of doubts into
roads are covered up. Time, and if this story is allowed to go on or is only treated in a partisan way, there can be long lasting impact on the level of trust of some parts of the Canadian population, especially those who might be tempted to go and find pretty foggy on top of the hill,
sources, quote unquote, of information on what's been going on between Canada and China. There is no place, I think, at this point in the 21st century to give any ounce of oxygen to the kind of conspiracy theories that can fester in the absence of clear answer and information on a story like this. And if this is allowed to go on without a non-partisan answer, this is the risk that we're facing, and this is a risk that's much more general than anything that has to do with China specifically.
You're already seeing it. I mean, Angus Reid Institute did polling showing that something like 42% of Conservative voters polled believe the 2021 election was stolen, in their words, because of Chinese interference. Catherine Cullen, given that, why would the Prime Minister resist the idea thus far of a public inquiry?
I think for a number of reasons, and I will say, I think it's important to note exactly what he's saying, Matt. I've been following his language very closely,
yes.
Which is, you're right to talk about it as a sort of resistance. He has not come out and said he won't hold a public inquiry. He's been asked day after day after day, and he continues to talk about why the existing mechanisms like this parliamentary committee that's underway should be allowed to do their work. So I think the door is in fact still open, and I think it will depend on what happens with this story. Do we see more leaks? Where does the pressure go? I think there are a couple of questions to ask, though, about moving forward with the public inquiry. From the Liberal perspective, I think we have to acknowledge politically that would probably be a relatively uncomfortable exercise for them, given the nature of some of the allegations that we are hearing. What the Globe and Mail reported, which is that the ideal outcome for Beijing in all of this was a Liberal minority government, and that many of the candidates that they hope to see in power in a handful of ridings were in fact Liberal. So something about that, I think, is not certainly politically beneficial for the government. There's also the question, though, of what kind of meaningful answers it would lead to. Emily points out to the question of what do we mean when we say public inquiry? Is this something that happens mostly in camera and doesn't actually kind of scratch that itch, these questions that so many Canadians want answered? Now it's mostly kind of a closed process, or is it a more public process, but then we still don't get the answers to these questions? Now, presumably there is some way to chart some sort of, I don't know if it's a middle course, but a smartest course here to bring down the temperature. That's why you're hearing all of these calls from, frankly, kind of across the political spectrum on this. The government is not prepared to go there yet, but it is not clear to me that they won't eventually. I think that really remains to be seen. We have to see how things play out over the next days and weeks.
Joanna, just briefly and finally on this point, Catherine mentioned Han Dong, the Liberal MP for Don Valley North, who's caught up in this global news suggesting the Chinese government in some degree supported his candidacy. CSIS, according to Global News, had warned Trudeau's team and asked it to rescind his candidacy. The Prime Minister suggested that it's racist to question whether Han Dong is loyal to Canada. What did you make of those words in particular?
So a lot of Chinese Canadians who have been trying to warn of China's activities for decades to me, they're saying they're feeling really frustrated because the idea that trying to look into what Beijing is doing, that it's racist, is something that Chinese state propaganda, that's their main defense, that's their main excuse and response whenever these questions are raised of them, that they're being singled out for being Chinese. So they're seeing the prime minister repeatedly, and not just in this instance, mirror what the Chinese government is saying when there are clear indications that foreign interference from China and other countries, including India, Saudi Arabia, Russia, is happening on Canadian soil. And I think we also need to know the context. You interviewed Dick Fadden in 2010 when he was CISA's head. He tried to warn journalists, the public, about what was happening. And MPs called for him to be fired, to step down, that he was being racist, that he was raising questions about the loyalties of politicians of Chinese descent. And of course, CSIS over 10 years ago, it's been reported that it was a very white, not a very diverse place. The way Mr. Fadden talked about these threats could have been a lot more nuanced and aware of any kind of connotations that it could be racist or xenophobic,
right.
but I think the conversation's come a long way since then, and we should talk. If we want clarity, if Canadians want clarity, one of the things that we can do in the meantime is to listen to these experts in our community who feel like they have been, kind of screaming and trying to wave the flag and warn people for years and years and years, testifying to Parliament about all these issues and being ignored. And also, Canada lacks mechanisms for people to give tips safely to police, to CSIS, and to have that be taken seriously. To now it goes into a black box or they're ignored by police and who aren't briefed and trained to understand how to investigate these issues.
Emily, Nicola, let's, just in the last few minutes that we have, talk about, there's another issue that's happening burning away in Ottawa, and you can imagine perhaps some say that Pierre Poilievre might be grateful that this attention is on this issue, considering the news last week that 3 of his own MPs met with a woman named Christine Anderson, who is a member of the far-right Alternative for Germany party. This is a party that's made anti-immigrant statements in past. She was very supportive of the trucker convoy. What sort of problems does that present for Pierre Poilievre?
It's a very long and tough week, it seems, for MPs and foreign affairs in general. We're just talking about China now. This is about Germany. It's tricky for Pierre Poilievre, and I agree with what you said that the story is taking the backseat because of how big the story on China election interference has been. However, I do say that even if the story isn't getting as much traction as it would otherwise, on the long term, this might come back to haunt Pierre Poilievre in the sense that if he essentially forgives his MP, or there's not real consequences, especially for Leslie Lewis, who is not only an MP but also part of his shadow cabinet, for engaging with a far-right elected official from Germany. If there's no consequences from that, then it means that in the future, whatever else his caucus does might be, and how he responds to that will be compared to how he dealt with this issue. And as well, often very soon there will be, because there always is, an attack on especially the Liberals and Justin Trudeau on how he deals with some issues in his caucus. There is also going to be, essentially that's going to be the bench against which his criticism of other party leaders might as well be measured. And so even if this story is not as big as it would be given the China story, it's still something that in the future, given how Pierre Poilievre is so new in a way still in his role, this might be something that catches with him in the near future when there's some other political issue that arises.
Catherine Cullen, last minute to you. Pierre Poilievre denounced Christine Anderson, called her views vile, but as a reporter asked him about it yesterday, he walked away from the microphone. Is that going to be enough to put this issue behind him?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. And again, I think it's going to depend what happens on this file. There is no indication that there are going to be specific consequences for those MPs. I think if it was going to happen based on the facts that we know right now, it would have already happened. Pierre Poilievre has to decide how he's going to try to manage these issues. Obviously, coming out forcefully calling Christine Anderson's views racist and hateful, saying that she is not welcome in Canada was an attempt to really, I think, send a strong message to Canadians who might be worried about this, but by not addressing this, are there being consequences with his own MPs? A lot of people are wondering, what does that really mean? To what extent is he still sort of leaving his MPs a little bit of leeway on the issue? So I think the big question will be, does this kind of thing crop up again, and does it force him to take stronger action on it? And will he, in fact, denounce her in front of a microphone anytime soon?
Never not a lot of things going on in Ottawa. Glad to have you all here to talk about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Catherine Collett, host of The House on your CBC Radio 1. Emily Nicolas is a columnist with Le Devoir. Joanna Chu is a national reporter with the Toronto Star and the author of China Unbound, A New World Disorder. Coming up after your CBC News.
They're working around really dangerous equipment. These are conveyor belts and packing machines that have sliced off people's fingers. They've ripped off a woman's scalp. And kids are in there until midnight.
A new report from the New York Times has revealed that tens of thousands of migrant children are working in U.S. factories and other workplaces. Coming up, how this happened and what the Biden administration says it will do about it. That story coming your way in 6 minutes. I'm Matt Galloway, and this is The Current. Stay with us.
This is CBC Radio 1, 96.1 FM in Timmins. Today on Commotion.
Okay, I'm gonna get a little philosophical here. If a song is not on Spotify, does it still make a sound? The groundbreaking music of De La Soul is finally on streaming services this week. We'll hear about a big question. If you're not on Spotify, how can that affect your legacy? It's just me, myself, and
Commotion with Elamine Abdelmahmoud. This morning at 11:30 in Newfoundland, and on the CBC Listen app.
It's just me, myself, and I.
The CBC News is next. Coming up in an hour, it's Q.
Rick Rubin gets called a mystic, and it's not just because of the long beard or the fact that he's always barefoot. It's because he's a master of helping the world's greatest musicians, from Public Enemy to Adele, tap into their creativity. And he'll be here to tell you how you can tap into your own.
From CBC News, it's The World This Hour. I'm Joe Cummings. Testimony continues today before the parliamentary committee looking into allegations of Chinese interference in the Canadian election process. And as the committee's work continues, so do the calls for a wider public inquiry. Janice McGregor reports.
Of course, this is a question of how much time and resources would be sucked up by a big national inquiry that essentially is repeating the work that two different parliamentary committees, one with security clearance and one without, are already attempting. Here's national security researcher Wesley Wark.
Any such public inquiry would take considerable time to hear evidence, to present a report. We're probably talking about a report that would be 2 to 3 to 4 years out, by which time, we may have faced another federal election.
New facts did emerge yesterday. First, we heard that the RCMP hasn't been investigating the allegations reported by the Globe and Mail about a Beijing-funded kickback scheme to reimburse donations to political campaigns. Officials also said yesterday they've been able to effectively shut down 5 police stations that Beijing was trying to run in cities across Canada. It's been using those to harass Canadian diaspora communities and direct these alleged foreign interference campaigns. Janice McGregor, CBC News, Ottawa.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken met briefly today with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. They spoke at the G20 Foreign Ministers Summit in New Delhi, India. As the war continues in Ukraine, it's the first senior-level meeting in months between the two countries. U.S. officials say Blinken made it clear that U.S. support for Ukraine will not waver. Canadian Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly was also at the summit, which ended without a consensus on the war. There has been yet another avalanche death in the Canadian Rockies. The RCMP in BC say a skier was killed yesterday and 4 people are in hospital after an avalanche near the Alberta border. Liam Britton has the details.
The slide happened around noon just outside the ski boundary of Panorama Mountain Resort, about 300 kilometers west of Calgary, near Invermere, BC. Search and rescue crews and police dog teams responded, as did paramedics by ground and by air. RCMP spokesperson James Grant said people caught in the avalanche were heli-skiing. It's been a deadly season in the BC backcountry. Before Wednesday, 9 people were killed in avalanches across the province. This year is bringing back memories of the deadly winter of 2002 and 2003, when 25 people were killed in avalanches. Experts blame this year's snowpack with a weak layer of sugar-like crystals buried near the bottom. They urge anyone venturing into the backcountry to check forecasts, be cautious, and carry equipment like an avalanche transceiver. Liam Britton, CBC News, Vancouver.
Canadian scientists are getting a better understanding of the impact of climate change on oceans by photographing microscopic organisms from space. And as Jayla Bernstein reports, a new study is revealing how warming waters may be linked to potentially damaging algae blooms.
They're really the food source for everything that lives in the ocean.
Invisible to the naked eye, but when they bloom, they can cover hundreds of square kilometers of ocean. Coastal phytoplankton are being tracked by scientists using satellites from above, capturing images of swirling green blooms like paint strokes on the blue ocean.
Although overall phytoplankton levels are declining, we're also getting these extreme pulses.
Daniel Boyce with Fisheries and Oceans Canada is a co-author of the study, recently published in Nature. His team found that over 17 years, global phytoplankton blooms happened more often and over a larger area. The study also linked those changes to warming ocean waters.
And we don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
Phytoplankton are a cornerstone of the ocean food web, but there can be too much of a good thing. Their concern is some of those blooms may be depleting oxygen below, suffocating marine life. Jayla Bernstein, CBC News, Montreal.
And that is the world this hour. You can listen to us live on your mobile device using the CBC Listen app. And remember, too, news anytime at our website, cbcnews.ca. For CBC News, I'm Joe Cummings.
Now, the weather. Most of the communities from Northbay through to Sault Ste. Marie along Highway 17 will be cloudy or mainly cloudy with the possibility of flurries this morning. For Sudbury, Elliott Lake, the North Shore, and Sault Ste. Marie, some clearing is expected this afternoon. The rest of the region, some sunshine, either sunny or a mix of sun and cloud. Near the Quebec border, there is also a chance of light snow this morning. Winds will eventually become lighter for most areas today. Highs will be from -9 to +1 degree, but in the far north, -16 to -12 degrees. And that's your look at weather.
Good morning, I'm Matt Galloway, and you're listening to The Current.
Well, everyone, have a good day. Looks like somebody dropped some feed or something for some birds. Oh, well. They seem to be happy. Getting some snow today, it looks like. Not very much, though, I don't think. But it might be all day long. Sun's trying to poke through, so clouds are pretty thick. -5 today. We'll see if it stays like that, -5, and then it'll go to 0. And then you'll start staying above 0. Probably somewhere around May or something like that. Around 5 degrees every day when you wake up. Some days could get colder, but the average days start to get a little warmer and longer. So, getting closer to spring. Have a good and safe day. I'll catch you guys later.